He was 16 years old when they burned his city to the ground. 16 when he watched Jerusalem's walls collapse under Babylonian siege engines. 16 when they put him in chains and marched him 1,000 miles across the desert to a city so vast and so cruel that it made every other city in the ancient world look like a village. Babylon. And they took him for a reason. He was noble-born, he was intelligent, he was handsome. He was exactly the kind of Hebrew boy an empire could break and rebuild in its own image. So they gave him a new name. They gave him a new god. They gave him a new king to serve. But they could not break him. Over the next 70 years, this teenager from a burned city would survive 4 emperors, 3 empires, 1 furnace hot enough to kill the guards who stood next to it, and 1 night sealed inside a cave full of lions. He would tell kings the exact moment they were about to die. He would predict the rise and fall of empires that would not exist for another 500 years. He would write visions so precise that historians today refuse to believe he wrote them at the time he says he did. Because if he did, then he predicted the exact date the Messiah would arrive on earth. And more than that, he predicted the end of history itself. This is the story they call fiction. This is the story that has terrified emperors, skeptics, and scholars for 2,500 years. This is Daniel. But before we get to the fire that killed the guards standing next to it, before the hand that appears on a palace wall and writes 4 words no living scholar can read, before the night he is sealed inside a cave full of lions, we have to go back to the day it all started. The day a teenager watched his city burn and got put in chains for the walk of his life. The year is 605 before Christ. Nebuchadnezzar II, the young crown prince of Babylon, has just crushed the Egyptian army at a place called Carchemish. Overnight, the balance of power in the entire ancient world has shifted. Egypt is broken, Assyria is already dead, and Babylon, this rising superpower on the banks of the Euphrates, is about to swallow every small kingdom between the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf. Jerusalem is one of those small kingdoms. King Jehoiakim, sitting on the throne of Judah, has to make a choice. He can bow to Babylon and pay tribute for the rest of his life, or he can hope Egypt somehow rises again to save him. He chooses to hope for Egypt. It is the worst decision he will ever make. Nebuchadnezzar arrives at Jerusalem's walls with the largest army the region has ever seen. He does not need to break the city. He simply needs to remind Jehoiakim, who now owns the world. He takes a portion of the temple treasures. He takes some of the sacred vessels of gold and bronze that had stood in the presence of God himself. And he takes something even more valuable to him. He takes the boys. The book of Daniel, chapter 1, describes what happens next in a chilling piece of ancient corporate strategy. Nebuchadnezzar orders his chief officer, a man named Ashpenaz, to select young men from the royal family and the nobility of Judah. Boys who are without physical defect, boys who are handsome, boys who are quick to learn, boys who show aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, well-spoken, and fit to serve in the king's palace. Then Ashpenaz is to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. Read that plan again. Because it is one of the most sophisticated psychological operations in the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar does not just want tribute, he does not just want slaves. He wants to take the smartest, most promising children of the nations he conquers, cut them off from their culture, teach them to think in his language, and turn them into his personal advisors. He is building an empire not just of soldiers, but of minds. He is stealing the future. And Daniel is one of the boys they take. We do not know exactly how old he was. Scholars estimate somewhere between 14 and 17, old enough to remember the smell of the temple incense. old enough to have prayed with his father in the court of Israel, young enough that his identity was still forming. He watches Jerusalem shrink behind him. The dusty hills of Judah give way to open plains, then to river country, then to a road so long that most of the boys have never walked further than the outskirts of their own towns. Some of them die on the journey, others go mad from grief. Daniel walks. He walks with 3 friends whose names history will remember for a very different reason: Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. 3 noble boys from Judah, taken in the same roundup, marched in the same chain. We do not know what they said to each other on that road. We can imagine prayers whispered under the breath, memories of home, fear of what waited for them at the end of a road that only led in one direction. And then, after weeks of walking, they see it. Babylon. Nothing in their lives has prepared them for Babylon. The city sits on the Euphrates like a jewel set in a river of gold. Its walls are so wide that Herodotus, writing a century later, will claim 4 chariots can race side by side along the top. The Ishtar gate rises in front of them, 60 feet high, covered in glazed blue tiles, with images of lions and dragons and bulls staring down from its towers. Behind the gate stretches the processional way, a broad street lined with more lions in blue and yellow tile, walking in an endless parade toward the center of the city, and in the center of the city they see it, the ziggurat of Etemenanke, 7 levels rising toward heaven, painted in colors that catch the sun and throw it back like fire. This is the tower the Babylonians believed connected Earth to the realm of the gods. This is what the Hebrews had heard about their whole lives as the Tower of Babel, and now they are inside its shadow. The boys are not put in prison, they are not put in fields. They are taken to the palace itself. They are washed, dressed, fed, and given a new name. And this is where the psychological war really begins. Because a name in the ancient world was not just a label. A name was a person's identity, a person's inheritance, a person's connection to their family and their gods. Daniel means, in Hebrew, God is my judge. It is a name that plants the Hebrew God right at the center of the boy's sense of self. The Babylonians take that away. They rename him Belshazzar. It means, roughly, may Bel protect the king. Bel was another name for Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. In one syllable, they have tried to replace Daniel's god with theirs. His 3 friends get the same treatment. Hananiah, whose name means the Lord is gracious, becomes Shadrach, a name tied to a Babylonian moon god. Mishael, whose name means who is like God, becomes Meshach, another name pointing to Babylonian gods. Azariah, whose name means the Lord is my help, becomes Abednego, servant of the god Nebo. You have to understand the elegance of this cruelty. The Babylonians are not just enslaving these boys, they are reprogramming them. Every time someone calls Daniel by his new name, they are speaking a small blessing over him in the name of a foreign god. Every day, dozens of times his own tongue is being trained to answer to a name that erases the God of his fathers. For 3 years these boys will study. They will learn Aramaic. They will learn the wedge-shaped writing of the Chaldeans. They will study astronomy, mathematics, dream interpretation, and the ancient literature of Sumer and Akkad. At the end of the 3 years, they will be tested by the king himself. The ones who pass will enter his personal service. The ones who fail will disappear. And Nebuchadnezzar does not tolerate failure. But before Daniel gets to that test, before he gets anywhere near the king, there is a smaller test coming. A test so seemingly small that most people miss it entirely. A test about food. Every day the king's servants deliver food and wine to the young men in training, and not just any food, the choicest food from the king's own table, delicacies that most people in Babylon would kill to taste, roasted meats, rich sauces. wine imported from vineyards across the empire. It is a program designed to fatten them into loyalty. A boy who eats the king's food day after day is a boy whose body is being built by the king's generosity. It is another layer of the reprogramming. Daniel refuses. The text says he resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and this is a strange line because there are many theories about what exactly bothered him. Some of it was probably the fact that the meat had not been slaughtered according to Hebrew law. Some of it was probably the fact that it had almost certainly been offered to Babylonian gods before being served. And some of it was probably the deeper thing. Daniel understood that if he ate the king's food, he was accepting the king as the source of his life. And Daniel would not do that. His life came from another king entirely. So he asks Ashpenaz for permission to eat something else. Ashpenaz likes Daniel. The text explicitly says God caused the chief official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. But Ashpenaz is also terrified. He tells Daniel, honestly, if you show up to the king's inspection looking thinner and paler than the other boys, the king will have my head. Literally, my head will be on a pole for helping you. Daniel proposes a test. A 10-day trial. Give him and his 3 friends only vegetables and water. Just 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, compare them to the boys who have been eating the royal food. If they look worse, Daniel will submit to the king's diet from then on. If they look the same or better, they get to keep eating what they choose. 10 days! You have to understand how absurd this test sounds. 10 days is nothing. Nobody transforms in 10 days. Nobody gains muscle, gains color, gains health on 10 days of vegetables and water. It should not work. From every biological standpoint, it should not work. But at the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends look healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who have been eating the king's food. The text does not explain how. It just states the fact. And Ashpenaz, seeing the result, quietly stops bringing them the royal delicacies. From that day forward, Daniel and his friends eat their vegetables, and they thrive. 3 years pass, 3 years of study, discipline, prayer, and quiet resistance. 3 years of holding on to who they were while surrounded by every temptation to forget. And then the day comes for the king's inspection. Nebuchadnezzar himself examines the young men. He interviews them. He tests them. He probes their knowledge of Babylonian culture, of astronomy, of dream interpretation. And when the interviews are done, the text says the king found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. In every matter of wisdom and understanding, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. 10 times better. The boys who ate vegetables. The boys who kept their old god. The boys who refused to be reprogrammed. Nebuchadnezzar takes them into his personal service. And Daniel, the Jewish teenager who was marched here in chains from a city that no longer stands, is now working inside the palace of the most powerful man on earth. But Daniel will not stay a quiet servant for long, because the king is about to have a dream, and that dream is going to change everything. It happens in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. The king has a dream that shakes him so badly he cannot sleep. He wakes in the middle of the night, sweating, disturbed, unable to close his eyes again. Something in the dream has told him that his empire, his rule, his entire future is at stake. But he cannot remember exactly what the dream was. He remembers pieces, fragments, images that dissolve when he tries to grab them. And this drives him almost insane, because the ancient world took dreams very seriously. A dream from the gods was a message. To lose a message from the gods was catastrophic. So Nebuchadnezzar summons the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the astrologers of Babylon. He summons the wise men of the greatest empire in the world. and he gives them one of the most impossible commands in all of ancient literature. He does not ask them to interpret his dream. He asks them to tell him what the dream was. The wise men are stunned. They tell him respectfully, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it for you." Nebuchadnezzar answers, and you can almost hear the paranoia in his voice, "No, you tell me the dream. If you can tell me the dream, then I will believe you can interpret it truly. If you cannot tell me the dream, then all of you are frauds. All of you will be executed, and your houses will be turned into piles of rubble." The wise men panic. They say, "There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter. What you ask is impossible. Only the gods can do this, and the gods do not live among human beings." That is exactly the wrong answer. Nebuchadnezzar flies into a rage. He gives the order. Every wise man in Babylon is to be executed. Every magician, every astrologer, every sorcerer, every enchanter, and the order includes Daniel and his 3 friends, because they are now officially classified as wise men of Babylon. When the executioners come to arrest Daniel, they find him at his home, calm. He asks the captain of the king's guard, a man named Arioch, what the trouble is. Arioch explains the situation. Daniel does not run. He does not hide. He asks Arioch to arrange an audience with the king. He tells the king he needs a little time, just a little time, and he will give the king both the dream and its interpretation. The king strangely agrees. That night, Daniel goes home to his 3 friends, and the 4 of them do something you rarely see in the ancient world. They pray together. They ask the God of heaven for mercy concerning this mystery, not for themselves alone, for all the wise men of Babylon. Because if God gives Daniel the dream, then Daniel does not just save himself, he saves every scholar in the empire from execution. And that night, in a vision, God shows Daniel the dream, every detail and its meaning. Daniel praises God. He goes back to Arioch and says, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king. I will tell him what he saw." He is brought before Nebuchadnezzar. And what Daniel says next is one of the most extraordinary speeches in ancient literature. He tells the king, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come." And then Daniel begins to describe the dream. "King," he says, "you were watching, and there before you stood a large statue, a dazzling, awesome statue. Its head was of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron. Its feet were partly iron and partly clay." Nebuchadnezzar sits forward on his throne. His skin goes cold, because Daniel has just described exactly what he saw. Daniel continues, "While you were watching, king, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay, and it smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces at the same time, and they became like chaff on a threshing floor in summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain, and it filled the whole earth." That was the dream, Daniel says. Now here is what it means. You, King Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. God has given you dominion, power, might, and glory. Wherever people live, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the air, he has given them into your hand. He has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold, but after you, another kingdom will rise, inferior to yours. That is the chest of silver. Then a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Then a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, that breaks and smashes everything. But just as iron will not mix with clay, so this final kingdom will be divided. Partly strong, partly brittle. And in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. It will crush all those other kingdoms and bring them to an end. But it itself will endure forever. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. The room is silent. Then Nebuchadnezzar, king of the greatest empire on earth, does something no one expected. He falls face down on the floor. He, the King of Kings, prostrates himself before this Jewish teenager. He orders sacrifices to be offered to Daniel, and he says, "Truly, your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, because you were able to reveal this mystery." Nebuchadnezzar makes Daniel the ruler over the entire province of Babylon. He places him in charge of all the wise men of the empire, and at Daniel's request, he appoints Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to administrative posts across the province. The Jewish teenagers, the boys taken in chains, are now running Babylon. But the story of the statue is not over, because Nebuchadnezzar, over the next few months, is going to keep thinking about the dream. He is going to remember one particular image, the head of gold. He is going to like that image very much, and he is going to decide that if he is a head of gold in a dream, then he should build a statue in real life, a statue of pure gold. But not just the head, all of it. And that decision is going to lead directly to the moment 3 young men will refuse to bow. And the largest furnace in the ancient world will be lit for their execution. Nebuchadnezzar builds his statue on the plain of Dura, 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, overlaid entirely in gold. It gleams in the sun like a second sun. The king summons every official in his empire, every satrap, every prefect, every governor, every advisor, every treasurer, every judge, every magistrate. He orders them to travel to the plain of Dura for the dedication of the statue. They arrive by the thousands. They stand in the desert around this glittering monster. And the king's herald steps forward and reads the decree. Peoples, nations, and men of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. The music begins. The sound of the horn rolls across the plain, and thousands of officials from every corner of the empire drop to their knees and press their faces against the sand. Every rank, every religion, every nationality on their faces at once. Because when Nebuchadnezzar orders you to bow, you bow. Almost everyone. 3 men do not. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, standing in their positions of authority near the front of the crowd, remain on their feet. You have to picture this. Thousands of people, faces down, absolute silence except for the music, and 3 men standing, not shouting or protesting, just standing there, refusing, while the horns keep playing and the priests keep chanting, and the sun keeps burning off the gold plates of the statue in front of them. The astrologers see it, and they run to the king. Some Jews, they tell him, that you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Nebuchadnezzar summons them. His face is furious. Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very well. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" The three young men give one of the most extraordinary answers in the history of the Bible. It is short, it is calm, it is unshakable. "King Nebuchadnezzar," they say, "we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Read that line one more time. Even if he does not. They do not know if they are going to die. They do not know if a miracle is coming. They only know that whether God saves them or not, they will not bow. Nebuchadnezzar snaps. The text says his attitude toward them changed, and his face became distorted with rage. He orders the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. He orders his strongest soldiers to bind the three men, still fully dressed, still wearing their robes, their trousers, their turbans, and their other clothes, and to throw them into the fire. The soldiers obey. But the furnace, at 7 times its normal heat, is so hot that when the soldiers approach the opening to throw the three men in, the flames leap out and kill the soldiers themselves. Instantly, they fall dead at the entrance to the furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fall inside, bound. Nebuchadnezzar is watching from a safe distance. He is expecting to see 3 bodies burning. He is expecting the smell of burnt flesh. He is expecting the satisfying end of a public execution. He does not get any of that. The text says he leaps to his feet in amazement. He turns to his advisors and asks, "Was it not 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" "Certainly, O king," they answer. "Look," he says. His voice is shaking. "I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nobody in the ancient world knew what to do with a story like this. Nobody today knows exactly what to do with it either, because inside the hottest furnace in the ancient world, the 3 men are alive. The ropes that bound them have burned away, but their skin has not, their clothes have not, their hair has not, and walking with them in the flames is a 4th figure whose appearance strikes Nebuchadnezzar with terror. Jewish tradition says it was an angel. Christian tradition often says it was the pre-incarnate Christ. The text simply says a 4th. And Nebuchadnezzar, watching, understands that whatever is in that fire with those 3 men is not from his world. Think about what he is actually looking at. He is the king of the largest empire on earth. He has built temples to every god in the known world. He has stood inside the sanctuary of Marduk. He has seen the rituals of Bel. He has heard the prayers of a dozen conquered nations invoking a dozen different names for the divine. And now, in a furnace that has just killed his own soldiers by proximity alone, he is watching a being walk in the fire that answers to none of the names in his lists. This is not a Babylonian god. This is not a familiar spirit. This is something older and quieter and more terrifying than anything his priests have ever described. And it is walking, unhurried, next to 3 teenagers from a burned city that his own grandfather's generation had trained him to forget. He approaches the opening of the furnace as close as he can bear, and he calls out, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here," and they walk out. The advisors and satraps and governors, the same men who bowed to the statue, crowd around them, and what they see is impossible. The 3 men are not burned, their hair is not singed, their robes are not scorched, there is not even the smell of smoke on them. Nebuchadnezzar makes a public statement. "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. And he promotes the 3 young men. They were teenagers when they arrived in Babylon in chains. They are now, unmistakably, some of the most powerful men in the empire. But their friend Daniel is going to face something even stranger, because Nebuchadnezzar the king is about to lose his mind, literally, for 7 years. And Daniel is going to be the one who has to tell him it is coming. Years pass. Nebuchadnezzar's empire keeps expanding. His building projects become more ambitious. The hanging gardens rise beside the palace, described later as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. New temples, new palaces, new victories, new tribute pouring in from every corner of the known world. And Nebuchadnezzar is starting to believe he did all of it himself. One night he has another dream. He sees a tree standing in the middle of the earth. The tree is enormous. Its top touches the sky. It is visible from every corner of the world. Its leaves are beautiful. Its fruit is abundant. All the beasts of the field find shelter under it. The birds of the air nest in its branches. Every living creature is fed from it. Then a messenger, a holy one, comes down from heaven. He cries out, "Cut down the tree, trim off its branches, strip its leaves, scatter its fruit. Let the beasts run away and the birds fly out of its branches. But leave the stump and the roots, bound with iron and bronze, in the field." Then the vision becomes even stranger. The messenger says, "Let his mind be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the mind of an animal. Let 7 times pass over him." Nebuchadnezzar wakes up shaking. He summons all his wise men, and again, none of them can interpret it. Finally, Daniel is called in. Daniel listens to the king describe the dream, and Daniel is silent for a long time. The text actually says he was appalled. His thoughts terrified him, because Daniel understands what the dream means, and he does not want to say it. The king sees this, and he tells Daniel, "Do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you." Daniel replies, "My lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries." Then Daniel tells him, "You are the tree, O king. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth. But you are going to be cut down. You will be driven away from people, and you will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like an ox. You will be drenched with the dew of heaven, and 7 times will pass by for you, until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and gives them to anyone he wishes." Then Daniel does something remarkable. He begs the king to change his ways. "Repent," he says. "Renounce your sins by doing what is right. Have mercy on the oppressed. It may be that your prosperity will continue." The king does not listen. 12 months pass. Nebuchadnezzar is walking on the roof of his royal palace one afternoon, looking out over the city he has built. And he says out loud, "Is this not the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" The words are still in his mouth when a voice speaks from heaven. "This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like an ox. 7 times will pass by for you, until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men, and gives them to anyone he wishes." Immediately the text says, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He is driven away from people. He begins to eat grass like cattle. His body is drenched with the dew of heaven. His hair grows long like the feathers of an eagle. His nails become like the claws of a bird. For 7 years, the king of Babylon lives as an animal in a field outside the palace he built. Modern psychiatrists have a name for this. It is called boanthropy, a rare mental illness in which a person believes he is a cow or ox. It is documented historically in a handful of cases. Somehow, the greatest king in the ancient world lived through 7 years of it. Then, at the end of the 7 years, the text says, he raised his eyes toward heaven, and his sanity was restored. Nebuchadnezzar is brought back into the palace. His advisors, still loyal, welcome him. His splendor and majesty are restored to him, but he is not the same man. And the last words he ever writes for the record are these: Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride he is able to humble. That is the last we hear from him. The next king in the story is not his son, and by the time we get to him, decades have passed. Daniel is now an old man, and Babylon itself is about to fall in a single night. In a hall full of music, in front of 1,000 nobles, because of a hand that will appear in the air and write 4 words on a plaster wall, and every wise man in the empire will stand in front of those words and be unable to read them. But before we get to that night, pause on Daniel for a moment, because the text does something quiet in the years between Nebuchadnezzar's death and Belshazzar's feast. It shows us the old man alone. Daniel is somewhere between his 70s and his 80s by now. He has served in the palace for over 5 decades. Every king he ever met is dead. Every friend he came in with, as far as the text tells us, is dead. Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, the 3 who walked out of the fire with him, have all quietly passed from history. There is no wife. There are no children. There is only Daniel, in a room in the palace of a city he was dragged to in chains as a teenager, praying 3 times a day toward a Jerusalem he has not seen in 60 years. The book of Daniel actually shows us this room. In chapter 6, it is the same upper room where he will later be arrested for the lion's den. His windows open toward Jerusalem. It is not a shrine. It is not a chapel. It is just an ordinary room in an ordinary corner of the palace, with the shutters left open and a rug on the floor where an old man kneels. We know what he prayed about, at least in one of those sessions. In chapter 9, we get a page-long transcript of Daniel's private prayer. He is reading the scroll of Jeremiah. He has just realized that Jeremiah, the prophet who was still preaching in Jerusalem when Daniel was a boy, had predicted that the exile would last exactly 70 years. Daniel counts. He is close to 70 years in Babylon. The exile is almost over. And what he does when he realizes this is not celebrate. He confesses. He confesses the sins of his people, not his own sins, the sins of the entire nation of Israel across generations. He calls himself, and all of Israel, ashamed. He begs God to forgive them and to return them home. He is an old man in a foreign city, praying by himself, holding the whole grief of a whole nation in his ribs. And it is while he is still praying, still on his knees, still weeping into the rug, that the angel Gabriel appears next to him in the room and gives him the vision of the 70 weeks. The most detailed prophecy of the coming of the Messiah anywhere in the Old Testament. Remember that scene. Remember what he was doing when the vision came, because it will matter when the visions get stranger and larger and darker. The old man on his knees in a locked room, alone at night, is the man to whom heaven eventually shows the end of the world. That is Daniel between the empires, and that is the Daniel Belshazzar's mother will remember when a hand starts writing on the wall. The year is 539 before Christ, 66 years after Daniel was marched to Babylon in chains. Nebuchadnezzar has been dead for over 20 years. His empire has passed through a series of weak kings, coups, and assassinations. The last real king is a man named Nabonidus, who spends most of his time away from Babylon in a distant desert city, worshipping the moon god. He has left his son Belshazzar in Babylon as co-regent, running the empire in his absence. And Belshazzar is nothing like his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar. He is a party king, arrogant, reckless, and blind to the danger closing in around him. Because outside the walls of Babylon, at this very moment, a new empire is rising. Persia, led by a king named Cyrus the Great. Cyrus has already crushed the Medes and unified them under his rule. He has already conquered most of Asia Minor. Now his army is camped outside Babylon itself. He has been besieging the city for months. But Belshazzar is not worried, because Babylon's walls are legendary. They are so wide, so tall, so thick, that no army in history has ever taken them by force. The city has enough grain stored inside to last for years. The Euphrates runs right through the middle of it, so they will never run out of water. Belshazzar is convinced the city is untakeable, so on this particular night he throws a party. He invites 1,000 of his nobles, his wives, his concubines, everyone who matters in Babylon. The palace is decorated, the wine is flowing, the music is loud enough to drown out the sound of the army camped outside the walls. And halfway through the party, drunk, Belshazzar has an idea. It is the idea that will kill him. He remembers the sacred vessels his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem all those decades ago. The gold cups, the silver bowls, the vessels that had once held the offerings to the God of Israel. They are still in the treasury, untouched, considered too sacred to use. Belshazzar orders them brought out. Servants haul the sacred vessels into the banquet hall. Belshazzar and his nobles and wives and concubines fill them with wine. They lift them, and they drink to the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. They are, in one gesture, mocking every conquered nation and every foreign god, but especially the God of Israel. They are using his sacred cups to toast their idols. And then, mid-toast, the party stops, because everyone in the room sees it at the same time. A hand, just a hand, attached to nothing, appearing in the air near the wall of the banquet hall, and it is writing. The music dies. The wine cups freeze in mid-air. Belshazzar is watching, and his face goes white. The text says, his color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him, so that his hip joints went slack, and his knees knocked together. The hand finishes writing, and it disappears. 4 words remain on the plaster. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Belshazzar shouts for his wise men, the magicians, the astrologers, the diviners. They stumble into the banquet hall, look at the words, and none of them can read them. Or more accurately, they can read the words individually in Aramaic, but they cannot make sense of them together as a message. The king is going mad with fear. Then his mother, the queen, remembers something. She rushes into the hall and says, "O king, live forever, do not be alarmed. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your predecessor he was found to have insight, intelligence, and wisdom like that of the gods. Your predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians. His name is Daniel. Call for Daniel." Daniel is now, by scholars' estimates, in his 80s. He is brought before Belshazzar, and the young king promises him incredible rewards: purple robes, a gold chain around his neck, the 3rd highest position in the kingdom. "Just tell me what these words mean." Daniel refuses the gifts. "You may keep your gifts for yourself," he says, "and give your rewards to someone else." Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means." And then Daniel does not just read the words, he preaches. He reminds Belshazzar of what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. He reminds him that Nebuchadnezzar was humbled by God, driven to eat grass, until he acknowledged that the Most High is sovereign. "But you, his descendant Belshazzar, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. You have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the vessels from his temple brought to you. You and your nobles drank wine from them, and you praised the gods of silver and gold, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways." Now here is what the words mean. Daniel says, "Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres." And this is the singular form of upharsin. "Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians." Belshazzar, despite everything Daniel just said, keeps his word about the reward. He clothes Daniel in purple, puts the gold chain around his neck, and makes a proclamation that Daniel is the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That night, the text says, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. That same night. What actually happened, historians now believe, is that Cyrus the Great's army had discovered the great weakness of Babylon, the Euphrates. The very river that had made the city unthirstable made it undefendable. Cyrus's engineers diverted the river upstream. The water level dropped, and in the middle of the night, while Babylon was drunk at a party, Persian soldiers waded up the riverbed, right under the walls of the city, and entered Babylon without ever having to fight through the gates. The party in the palace was still going on when the Persian soldiers arrived at the throne room. The head of gold, from Daniel's very first vision of the statue, was dead. And the chest of silver, the next empire, had arrived. The new king is Darius the Mede. He takes over the administration of Babylon under the authority of Cyrus, and within a few days of his arrival, he does something remarkable. He appoints Daniel. Daniel, at this point, is somewhere in his 80s. He has served 3 Babylonian kings and now a Persian one. And Darius, watching Daniel work, is so impressed that he decides to elevate him above every other administrator in the empire. The text says, Darius planned to set Daniel over the whole kingdom. This does not go over well with the other administrators. They try at first to find something to accuse Daniel of. Anything, some scrap of corruption, some sign of incompetence, some scandal in his past or his present. They cannot find anything. The text is remarkable on this point. It says they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. So they get creative. They realize the only way to bring Daniel down is to attack the one thing about him that never changes, his faith. They go to Darius, and they flatter him with a proposal. "O king, live forever. All the royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den." Notice the trick. They tell the king that all the administrators have agreed, which is a lie. Daniel has not agreed, but Darius does not know that. And the flattery works. Darius is a new king in Babylon. He wants to consolidate his power. He wants the population to look to him. He signs the decree. And under Persian law, once the king signs a decree, not even the king himself can undo it. The trap is set. Daniel finds out immediately, and he does not hide. He does not modify his prayers. He does not lower his voice. He walks straight to his home, goes to his upper room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem, and he kneels down on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. The conspirators are watching. They report him to Darius, and Darius, when he realizes what has happened, is horrified. He has been played. The text says he was greatly distressed and made every effort until sundown to save Daniel. He tries to find loopholes. He tries to find exceptions. He tries everything. But the law of the Medes and Persians cannot be changed, even by the king. At sundown, the conspirators come back and demand the sentence be carried out. Darius has no choice. He gives the order. Daniel, this frail old man who has been loyal to 4 kings across 70 years of service, is arrested. And here is one of the strangest moments in the whole narrative. Before Daniel is thrown into the den, Darius speaks to him, and Darius says, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." The king himself, who signed the death sentence, is praying that Daniel's God will do what he cannot. Daniel is lowered into the den. A stone is rolled over the mouth of the pit. The king seals it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that nothing concerning Daniel could be changed. Then Darius goes back to his palace, and he does not sleep. He does not eat. He refuses entertainment. He walks the halls of his palace all night long, waiting for dawn. At the first light of morning, Darius runs to the lion's den. He does not walk. He does not have his servants go first. The king of the empire himself runs. He arrives at the pit, and he calls down into it in a voice full of anguish, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" And from inside the pit, a voice comes back up. "O king, live forever! My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." Darius is beside himself with joy. He gives the order. Daniel is lifted out of the den, and when he is examined in the daylight, the text says, "No wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God." Then Darius, whose anger is now white-hot, gives another order. The men who had falsely accused Daniel are brought to the den, along with their wives and their children. All of them are thrown in. The text says, "Before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones." Darius writes a new decree. "To the peoples, nations, and men of every language throughout the land, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And Daniel, the boy who was marched here in chains at 16, continues to serve. Under Darius, then under Cyrus. He outlives them all. But before he dies, he is going to receive visions so precise and so terrifying that historians today refuse to believe he wrote them at the time he says he did. Because if he did, then he predicted the exact rise and fall of empires that would not exist for another 200 years. And more than that, he predicted the year the Messiah would arrive on earth. The last 6 chapters of the book of Daniel are not stories. They are visions. And they are unlike anything else in the Old Testament. Daniel sees 4 great beasts coming up out of the sea, each one representing a kingdom: a lion with the wings of an eagle, a bear raised up on one side, a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings, and a 4th beast, terrifying and powerful, with iron teeth and 10 horns, that crushes everything before it. The 4 beasts, the angel explains to Daniel, are 4 kingdoms that will rise on the earth. Read against history. The 4 kingdoms line up with astonishing precision. Babylon, which Daniel is standing in, Medo-Persia, which is about to conquer Babylon. Greece, which will conquer Persia under Alexander the Great 2 centuries later. And Rome, which will crush every kingdom in the region and dominate the world for 1,000 years. And out of that fourth beast, Daniel sees another vision, a little horn that grows up among the 10 horns, a horn that will speak boastful words against the Most High, a horn that will oppress the saints and try to change the sacred times and the laws. Christians throughout history have tried to identify this figure. Some say it is Antiochus Epiphanes, the Greek king who desecrated the Jewish temple in the 2nd century before Christ. Others say it is a future Antichrist. The text itself simply describes what Daniel sees, but the most famous prophecy in the entire book is not about the beasts. It is about 70 weeks. An angel named Gabriel appears to Daniel, and Gabriel tells him something so specific, so dated, that scholars have been arguing about it for 2,000 years. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city, Gabriel says, to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. 77s, 70 periods of 7 years, 490 years total. Know and understand this, Gabriel continues. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. Then the Anointed One will be cut off and will have nothing, and the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Historians and theologians have counted the years from every possible starting point. And a certain calculation, starting from a specific decree issued by the Persian king Artaxerxes to rebuild Jerusalem in the year 445 before Christ, lands the arrival of the Anointed One at approximately the year that Jesus of Nazareth began his public ministry. Then, 30-something years later, the Anointed One was cut off, crucified outside the walls of Jerusalem. And 40 years after that, in the year 70 after Christ, the Roman legions of Titus destroyed the city and the sanctuary, just as Gabriel had told Daniel over 500 years earlier. This is why some skeptical scholars have argued that the book of Daniel could not possibly have been written when it claims to have been written. They argue that no one could have predicted history with that kind of accuracy, so the book must have been written after the fact, dressed up as prophecy. They call this the 2nd century date theory, and it is still hotly debated today. Believers argue the opposite. They argue that the accuracy is the whole point, that the book of Daniel exists precisely to show that history is not random, that it moves according to a plan, and that God knows the end from the beginning. Whichever position you take, the fact remains. The book of Daniel contains one of the most precise historical timelines ever written in ancient literature, and every empire it names has risen and fallen exactly as it said. The visions get stranger from there. Daniel sees a ram with 2 horns being crushed by a goat with a single great horn. The great horn is broken, and 4 smaller horns rise in its place. History records that after Alexander the Great died at the age of 32, his empire was divided among his 4 generals. The vision matches the history to the letter. The angel Gabriel later tells Daniel explicitly what the vision meant. The 2-horned ram is the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. The goat is the king of Greece. The great horn between his eyes is the first king. Daniel is being told, in a dated document, the exact geopolitical map of the next 3 centuries. And then, out of one of the 4 horns of the goat, Daniel sees another little horn grow up. This one will grow in power to the south and to the east. It will magnify itself to the level of the prince of the host. It will take away the daily sacrifice. it will trample the sanctuary. History records that in the 2nd century before Christ, a Greek king named Antiochus Epiphanes did exactly that. He took Jerusalem, he entered the temple, he set up an altar to Zeus on the altar of the God of Israel, he sacrificed a pig on it, and he tried to force every Jew in Judea to abandon their faith on pain of death. It was the greatest religious desecration in the history of the Jewish people until the Roman destruction of the temple 2 centuries later. Daniel described it in detail over 300 years before it happened. Daniel sees a great final vision by the banks of the Tigris River. A man dressed in linen, whose body was like beryl, whose face was like lightning, whose eyes were like flaming torches, whose arms and legs gleamed like burnished bronze, and whose voice was like the sound of a multitude. Daniel collapses at the sight. The men who are with him do not see the vision. They only feel a terror that drives them away, and Daniel is left alone, face down on the ground by the river. The man in the vision touches him. Slowly, Daniel is able to lift his head, and the man begins to speak. He tells Daniel about future wars, future kings, future betrayals, future desolations, all in language so specific that historians have identified many of the exact rulers and battles the vision describes. He talks about a king of the north and a king of the south, whose alliances and betrayals over the next 2 centuries are recorded in Daniel chapter 11. Historians who have compared the chapter to the actual history of the Ptolemaic and Seleucid kings of Egypt and Syria after Alexander have described the match as almost verse by verse. It is one of the reasons the skeptical scholars insist the book must have been written after the fact. Because if it was written before, then the man in linen by the Tigris knew things no human being should have known. And then, at the very end, the man in the vision tells Daniel something personal. Daniel is now, by scholars' estimates, around 90 years old. His life is nearly over. And the man in the vision says, "But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge." The vision closes with a description of the resurrection of the dead. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. It is the clearest statement of the resurrection anywhere in the Old Testament, and it is Daniel who wrote it down. At the very end of the book, the vision gives Daniel one final promise. "As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance." Go your way till the end, rest, and then rise. That is the last thing God says to Daniel in the entire book. The book of Daniel does not describe his death. It ends with the vision by the Tigris. Just as suddenly as it began, it stops. Jewish tradition, however, keeps the story going. According to some traditions, Daniel eventually returned to his ancestral homeland. Others say he died in Persia, in the city of Susa. The tomb of Daniel, if it exists, is a matter of centuries-old dispute. Multiple sites in Iran and Iraq claim to hold his body. The most famous is in Susa, a small city in southwestern Iran. Others in Kirkuk, in Muqtadiya, and in other places. Nobody knows for sure. Somehow, 3,000 years after Moses died in an unknown grave, and 2,500 years after Daniel closed his last vision, the two greatest prophets of the Old Testament share the same mystery. Nobody knows where either of them is buried, but Daniel's real tomb is not a piece of ground. It is the book that carries his name. Because of him, the world got a language for something it had never had a language for before. The end of history, kingdoms of iron, a stone cut without hands, a little horn that boasts against heaven, a ruler who is cut off with nothing, an abomination that causes desolation. These are all Daniel's images. He gave the world the vocabulary that every apocalyptic vision since has drawn from. Jesus himself, in the Gospels, quotes Daniel by name when he talks about the end of the age. The book of Revelation, the last book of the entire Bible, is essentially a book-length echo of Daniel's visions, reopened and expanded 1,500 years later. 2,500 years after his death, sermons are preached from Daniel's book every week in every corner of the world. Historians write about him, theologians argue about him, novelists reimagine him, films are made about him. His images run through the visual language of every apocalyptic novel and every doomsday film. And every year, somewhere in the world, some scholar or preacher opens the book of Daniel and tries again to date the return of the Messiah using its numbers. But the strangest thing about his story is not the miracles. The strangest thing is what he lived through. He was taken from his home at 16. He never saw his parents again. He never married, as far as the text tells us. He never had children. He never sat in the temple in Jerusalem after the year they marched him away. He served 4 kings across 3 empires in 70 years of exile. He was almost executed twice. He was hated. He was plotted against. He was thrown to lions. And through all of it, 3 times a day, he opened his window toward the city he could not go home to, and he prayed. That is the picture the book of Daniel leaves us with. Not a miracle worker, not a dream interpreter, not a prophet standing on the throne room floor, just an old man on his knees, praying toward a city he would never see again. And somehow, in that room, alone, whispering the names of a homeland that had burned to the ground before he was old enough to shave, he heard the voice of God. He saw the empires of the world laid out like a chessboard. He learned when the Messiah would come. He saw the resurrection of the dead in a vision so specific he wrote it down. He predicted the end of everything. The teenager they took from Jerusalem outlasted every empire that took him. That is the story of Daniel. If this film moves something in you, and you want more Bible stories where the ordinary details of a person's faith turned into some of the most stunning moments in ancient history, there is another one on your screen right now. It looks at another Old Testament figure who saw the future so clearly it terrified him, and whose visions changed the way the world thinks about the end. Watch it next, and subscribe so you do not miss the ones we release every week. I will see you at the next mountain.